Hey guys, welcome back to another How to Beat Live Low Stakes poker video. Today's video looking at two hands as part of this hand history review where I actually was dealt the same exact hand, pocket sevens, in position versus the same kind of like somewhat nittier but kind of ABC tight type of player. And we got two completely different boards, so I thought this was actually a really cool video to make because it shows different trains of thought on both of the boards. So, first hand, and we were roughly about 500 effective in both of these. It's set up for 1-3. It's technically 1-2, but it doesn't really matter. So, opponent makes it 15. I make it 40. I don't know a ton about his 4-betting range yet, so I wanted to make sure I didn't commit too much to where I have to auto-fold to 4-bets because he's just never bluffing, so I would. But I do, like a lot of you will just call in these spots. I do like to isolate almost every time from every position, even on the button. Might mix in a few calls on the button every now and then, but I'd like to get these players out and get it to where I'm not relying so much on my equity, but I can just rely on my skill level to win a lot more pots heads up. So do make it 40. Our opponent calls. Very dynamic board, Queen Jack 7, and he checks. I think this smaller sizing works really well. We're deeper, so like this is fine. If we were a lot shallower, then I think it does make some sense to go a lot smaller. But basically what happens is he'll fast play top of range for the most part, like top 2 or better, maybe some ace queen, maybe kings that he was, I don't know, too nitty to 4-bet, I guess. That does happen in the live low stakes game sometimes. But if he does call, we get a lot of info about his range. We get just a lot more clarity. He very likely has a Queen X hand at best. So we know how to proceed on most every turn. We get a King of Hearts and a very unorthodox line that we face. He now decides to lead into us for 100. I think that's almost always either like King Queen or Ace King. I can't imagine there being a line where he just check calls small with like, let's say, middle set of jacks and then just decides to bet turn. So kind of a boring one, but I do go all in. He calls. He doesn't show, but I'm almost fairly certain it's, and by fairly certain, I am willing to guarantee he has either King Queen suited or Ace King that he decided to check call flop with. I would say, I don't know. It's probably either or. Like I said, I don't think it's anything else. But yeah, we'll move on to the next hand. So again, like I said, I received the same hand in almost the same exact situation. Make it 40. Still don't know a ton about how he's going to react as far as like a larger sample size to 3-bet. Could start to go larger if I think that he's never going to put me in really bad spots. And if larger does get him to maybe fold some hands, that could help as well. This time, though, we get the incredibly static, dry texture of King 6 deuce. And he decides to check. So there's two ways to go about it. One, you can bet range for small. It's a king high board. You're doing very well in the spot. The other is, you know, if you guys are a little bit deeper, you can start to size up and start to polarize a little bit more. Like I would bet ace king or better for value. And then my bluffs would come from hands like 6x that maybe block rare sets. Your 6x hands will also have more outs to his one pair hands. Like, for example, if I have 7-6 suited here, that has more outs to trips or 2 pairs than, say, if I had a hand like pocket sevens. I would also choose gutters like 5-4 suited would be obviously the main candidate here, but it's obviously a pretty narrow range. Your opponents aren't going to read much into that. But if you think that they will fold exploitatively just to larger sizings, like if you think a sizing of, say, like 50 or 60 here, which is really large for this scenario with this low SPR 3-bet pot, if you do think they're going to fold hands like pocket nines or you've seen a player do that, then I would include that kind of sizing. Otherwise, it makes a lot of sense to go small because it does make him, like we start to build a pot to possibly get him to fold one pair hands later, which is really nice. We also simply, by betting here instead of just checking with some showdown value, we don't feel like we're going to get bluff raised enough in this spot to worry about bet folding too much equity. We also start to apply a lot of pressure onto the ace X portion of his range, which he has a lot here. And that's one thing I want to mention, guys. If you guys are over, like, not over betting, that's because that could confuse you, but like, let's say you're betting too frequently with ace X hands here that miss. I think that's a huge mistake. I think on the dry king high boards, you can still bet everything for small. But if you guys are betting a lot of ace X air hands and 3-bet pots, especially in position, you're blocking a lot of their folds, which come from like ace queen and ace jack, ace 10 suited that have missed the flop. So you want to be mindful of that. A lot of your air that you would love to bet in spots where maybe you do have a checking range, you would want to bet a lot of like your king high and queen high, jack high combos. And I'm not talking about just on this king high board. Obviously, a king high combo would be top pair here. But I mean, in general, a lot of your bluffs want to come from like the king and queen high hands that get that it's a huge win to get your opponent to fold ace high at that point. But when you have an ace, you block more of your ace high hands that your opponent has. That means he's more pocket pair heavy, and there's not going to be as much fold equity there. So those do benefit from some checkbacks. Like I said, on this really dry king high board, that's a really good board for us. You can argue to bet small with everything. But I like betting with the pocket pair here because it unblocks the ace X portion of his range. If we get that to fold, that's a nice win because he does have a lot of equity with his overcards. And if he does call, it still could be some ace X hands, but it could be hands like pocket eights, pocket nines, tens, jacks that we'll see how he proceeds on future streets. We do have some showdown value against the ace X that a lot of times what will happen is we'll bet flop, he'll call, and we potentially see a cheap river, and that's fine if we lose a small pot or we win a small pot. But a lot of you guys will think to just give up betting with the sevens at this point because you have showdown value when a lot of times in the live low stakes games, your opponents will play so straightforward that they kind of leave the door open for you to do perhaps some more aggressive things. So my opponent does call here, and I am foreshadowing a little bit. 6 of diamonds on the turn, and once this board pairs up, I don't think I have like a lot of fold equity here with bluffs. I don't think I have, or I think I do have a fair amount of showdown value against like his ace queen, ace jack, ace 10. Yeah, I'm going to lose to some pocket pairs, like I said, that are better. Some king X that he's check calling with, but it's just not a great card to really bet on. And once we bet flop and we have a pocket pair on the turn, like we're not going to be doing a whole lot of betting. So I do check, and he checks as well. Or I'm sorry, he checks and then I check behind. 8 of clubs on the river, and this is where you guys will auto check back when your opponent checks in the spot. I decided to go all in. And the reason for that with this huge, massive overbet is that most opponents, especially if you have a good read, and I have a good read that this opponent's very like straightforward. He's not looking to get tricky with a hand like quad tier or like pocket eights that have rivered a boat. If they know you're more aggressive, they might trap you sometimes here. Maybe there's an argument for not having to go this large. You can get them to fold maybe for 200 into 144. But I decided I wanted to implement max pressure onto, let's say, his queens, his jacks, his tens, which, like I said, yes, maybe they'll fold for 200. But this line, like the bet, check, back, if you will, and then overbet river line, it looks either like, to a good player, like some kind of weird slow played boat or air. And so if even to like the most recreational opponent, like this does look a little fishy, but your opponent's not going to be willing to look you up for $430 into a $150 pot. They're just not. And he's basically told me exactly where he's at in the hand. It's like he basically either has like ace X hands that, yes, I do have showdown value against, but I'm going to beat those hands anyway. If I bet, they're just not calling. And maybe like ace X might call for small, but all small does is like usually get folds from worse, and I get him to easily look me up with a hand like pocket tens. Whereas if he has queens, jacks, tens, nines here, I think those are pretty much always folding to this massive overbet. So yes, it's potentially, like I said, I'm willing to listen to arguments that I don't have to go 430 here. I could go like 250 and I get the same result. That's totally fine. I thought about that right after I made the bet in the hand, and I was like, well, I think it still works way more often than it needs to be very profitable, but maybe in this particular spot, if I just put anything reasonable in, he's probably still folding a fair amount of the underpairs, but it needs to still be larger than pot, in my opinion. Like anything doesn't mean like we just blow at the pot with like 75 here. You're just never, ever getting him to fold any pair, and he shouldn't be folding. You do have to be a little mindful with opponents that are capable of a little bit of balance. And if they're really nitty, like if he check called like king, queen, check turn, and then he checks to you again on the river. And that's why if you flip this spot, and let's say you did for some reason not 4-bet and you're out of position with like ace king or king queen, I would check river after they check back turn because they're going to stab a lot on the river, especially if your opponent is more aggressive, if they're a professional, and then you can just snap them off with the top of your range with that King X. But be prepared to bluff catch a lot in the spot if you're this player, because most opponents will not value bet here. They won't use this sizing for one. They'll bet like something it's more standard, like they'll bet like 90 or 100 or 75. But most, I don't think, are going for a lot of thin value with hands like pocket jacks or tens. They're going to have more air than anything. They'll have like ace jack, ace 10. Could be a hand like, I don't know, 7-5 suited if you think they're capable of 3-betting pretty light. Ace 4 suited, ace 5 suited, if you will. But this is a spot that I feel that you guys are not taking advantage of enough. And this is more like use this line of thinking in many other spots and not just these 3-bet pots, guys. Like, if you have showdown value, but you think you still lose to like a fair amount of your opponent's range, if you think they're very capped and you're very confident that they're never showing up with top pair or better in a spot, then be prepared to throw in some massive overbets, and you're going to get them to fold way more often than not. Like, we just get him to fold range here. So, yeah, like I said, I think there's some spots where we can scale this down just a little. But you need to be careful about going too small and understand what that accomplishes. Now, let's say, for example, let's say for some reason you bet flop and you felt you need to check some turns with some of your King X, and then your opponent checks to you on river. I wouldn't overbet with a hand like, let's say, King 9 suited here on the river, because all we're doing is just getting him to fold everything, and then we get the very rare occasional snapped off with like rivered boats, right? But if we have King 9, and let's say I do bet 70 into 144, I think he's almost always calling with some kind of pocket pair that we beat. So that's how you can look at it from an exploitative perspective. Like, I would choose a different value sizing here. Now, if you get a run out where you feel that your opponent's very strong here and you have kings fold, then you would want to bet 1,000 if he has 1,000 left. Like, who cares how dumb it looks if you just get him to fold and you don't get a call from a hand like trip sixes? Like, they're not going to fold those hands. Like, they're going to be inelastic, meaning that if they're going to call 100 with trips here, they're going to call 1,000 with trips here. So those are a few thoughts to keep in mind, guys. But start turning more of your like hands that you believe have some showdown value. And I'm not saying it'd be wrong to check back here. That's also a fine way to play the hand. But I think we can do better when we know that our opponents are giving us an opening to always win the pot, as opposed to just sometimes winning when we check back. And like I said, you can maybe go 200 instead of 430. That might be the perfect sizing. We might get him to fold just as often for 200 as we do 430 here. But in case somebody does want to get a little sticky and it looks a little bluffy, 200 into 144 is not that bad, especially if it's an opponent that is not scared money. That's the thing too. If you think your opponent is scared money and they're really nitty, then I think 200 can work. If you think it's somebody, though, that, like, especially, it depends on your image. If you've been playing pretty aggressive overall, if your opponent's not scared money, you've seen them willing to bluff catch, you've seen them willing to bet thinly in spots, that means they're not afraid to lose chips, then you can't just go 200 here. You got to go 430. You got to put the hammer down and absolutely make sure that you have maximum pressure here. So, yeah, definitely a lot of thoughts going on at the end and overall in this hand, but I know the first hand was pretty quick. Gave you guys a good example of what I'm thinking on those dynamic boards. But when you do get these static boards, you're going to most likely, after betting, have like a lot of hands that want to get to showdown. But if they leave the door open for you to overbet, you can. Now, one more thing. If I had a hand that had some showdown value, let's say I did have jacks or queens here, I might go for like a smaller bet, trying to get thin value out of a worse pair, but I don't need to bluff that hand because it has more showdown value. But like sevens, if you can get nines, tens, jacks, those better pairs to fold that are under that king, then it makes a lot of sense to go really large. So if you guys have any questions or comments, go ahead and let me know. Otherwise, I will catch you in the next video. Please subscribe to the channel, like the video, come visit us over at archcitypoker.com, where we will have a lot more in-depth analysis such as this. See you guys in the next video. Thanks.